Hi guys, welcome to ASM Education. Hope you all are having a great day. This is chapter 8 of the book McKinsey Way. This chapter talks about how interviews are conducted at McKinsey. So let's just start. If you haven't seen the previous videos, just go and watch the videos. We have made a playlist called the McKinsey Way. Without watching those videos, maybe you will not be able to get the maximum out of this video. So it's just a request. Please go and watch the previous videos and then start with this video. So let's begin about interviewing at McKinsey. So he says that the author says that in every McKinsey engagement, someone on the team will conduct an interview. There will always be someone who has information that the team needs. It can be an executive at the client, a production line supervisor, a supplier, a customer, and even an industry expert, or sometimes even a competitor. Interviewing is the way by which you can fill the gap in the knowledge base and tap into the experience and knowledge of the client. The client is doing that business for years and years, and you will just have 2 months or 3 months to understand the business completely and give a view to the client. So that is why you have to fill this knowledge gap as soon as possible. So interviewing is a very important part of the problem solving process. You see, the author says that you can learn a lot from reading magazines, articles, books, scholarly papers, but to get into the nitty gritty of any organization, you have to ask questions and get answers from the people on the front line who are doing it day in and day out. And the author says that it doesn't matter whether you're the most junior person or you're the most senior or of senior vice presidents. You will find yourself in a situation where you will need the information in someone else's head. However high your position in the organization is, does not matter. Any person will need information in someone else's head. And the, the author is highlighting again and again how important this chapter is, how important this process of interviewing is. He says that if you read no other chapter of the book from start to finish, read this one. He thinks that you will learn something very valuable that you will not find elsewhere. So the author says, be prepared, write an interview guide. He says that you will have only 30 minutes with a person whom you will never see again. He says that when he asked an alumni for the best advice uh, on interviews, every single one of them said, write an interview guide. That's it, write an interview guide. Now, what is this interview guide? So we'll get to it. He says that many people resent being interviewed. A guide is the best tool for getting what you want from the interviewees and making the best use of their time and yours. Your their time is very important, so you have to be very structured. So when preparing the questions, he says you should think on two levels when you're constructing the guide. First is that what are the questions to which you need the answers. You have to figure out what the questions are and just write them down in any order. Secondly, and more importantly, think, why are you conducting this interview? What do you really need from it? What are you trying to achieve? Why are you talking to that person? Once you find the purpose of the interview, you will be able to put your questions in the proper order and you will be able to phrase them correctly. The author says you should try to know as much as possible about the interview in advance before the interview. The author says that what McKinsey follows as a rule is that interview should start with general questions, and as the interview proceeds, you should move on to the specific questions. He says you should not dive into the sensitive areas immediately. You should go slowly and gradually, and then proceed to sensitive questions. And why do you do that? This will help the interviewee warm up, and it will help you develop a rapport. When deciding on questions, which questions you have to ask, you might want to include some to which you know the answer. And why would you do that? This will give you insight into whether the interviewee is knowledgeable, and whether he's honest with you or not. Once you've written your guide, look at it and ask yourself what are the three things that you most want to know by the end of the interview. These are the things you will focus on when you go into the interviewer's office. Again, you can see that as we had discussed earlier, mckinsey McKinsey has things always in sets of 3 3 3. And the author says that finally, every interview guide should conclude with what he calls the prototypical McKinsey question. He says, put away your guide and ask the interviewee if there's anything else he'd like to tell you or any questions you forgot to ask. And why would you do that? This might give you an idea of anything that you might have missed. Also, this might give you a new perspective from the person who is doing that business for years and years. And uh, so lot of times the interviewee might say that there is nothing that you've not covered, but once in a while you'll strike pay dirt, and that will be very helpful in the entire assignment. So now moving on to the next part of the chapter, the author says when conducting the interview, listen and guide. He says that when you're picking people's brains, ask questions and then let them do the talking. He says that most people love to talk, especially if you let them know you're interested in what they're saying. He says that McKinsey consultants receive a lot of training in interviewing techniques. The first thing that they are taught was always let the interviewee know you are listening. Also, a lot of things about body languages are taught to the consultants. So, for example, if the interview is speaking, you should lean towards them slightly so they know that you're interested. When they have completed a sentence, you should nod. You should remember that the consultants conduct interviews because they want access to the information, experience, and anecdotes in another person's head. And to get the information in someone else's head, you have to remember that they should feel that you're listening and you're interested in what they have to say. And the author gives one final trick. He says that if you want people to say more than they have already said, if you think they have left out something important but you're not sure what it is, he says, say nothing. He says, let the silence hang. Chances are they will start talking just to fill the gap. Why? Because nature abhors a vacuum and so do most people. Okay, so now we'll move to the next part, and this is 7 tips for successful interviews. This is also a very, very important part of this chapter, and I would say this is one of the most important parts of this book. Okay, so the author says always think strategically when conducting an interview. Now, one by one, we will go through all the 7 points. He says, have the interviewee's boss set up the meeting. Going through, the boss tells the interviewee that the interview is important. Then he says, interview in pairs. It's very difficult to conduct an effective interview on your own. You may be busy taking notes, and when you're so busy doing that, you might forget to ask the right questions. You may miss the non-verbal cues. You might not be able to read the body language. So that's why there should be two people, at least two people, who are conducting an interview. He says then listen and don't lead. Okay, he says that you do not want yes or no answers to your questions. You need exhaustive answers and as much information as possible. So you should talk as little as possible and should listen as much as you can. He's also, your questions should be structured in such a manner that the interview is able to speak. You should ask open-ended questions. If you ask yes or no or multiple choice questions, the answers will be yes or no or just tick marks that you will get. Then the author says paraphrase, paraphrase, paraphrase. Okay, by doing this, what you are repeating what the interview has said in a structured manner. This will help the interviewee understand whether you've understood what he is saying. Also, this will give a chance to the interviewee to add additional information or amplify some important points. Then the author says use the indirect approach. Now, what is the indirect approach? The author says that you have to be sensitive to the interviewee's feelings. Understand that the person may feel threatened. Don't dive right into the tough questions. Do it indirectly. Then the author says don't ask for too much, and he says there are 2 reasons why you shouldn't do so. First, if you ask too much, then you might actually get it. You might have so much information that you will not know what is relevant. So first, narrow down your goals to 2 or 3 most important questions, and your entire interview should be along those questions. If you ask a lot of stuff, you will be lost. Secondly, the author says you should stop short of the straw that breaks the camel's back. That is, being interviewed is an uncomfortable experience. If you compound that discomfort by pressing too hard, the interviewee might become uncooperative and the purpose of the interview will get defeated. And lastly, the author says adopt the Colombo tactic. What does he says that after Colombo finished quizzing a murder suspect about the whereabouts on the night in a question, he would pick up his rumpled raincoat and head out the door. As he reached the threshold and was about to leave, he would turn around, stick his finger up to his temple and say, "Excuse me, ma'am, but there's something I forgot to ask." This question invariably give Colombo the answer he needed to figure out who did it. If there's a particular question you need the answer to or a piece of data that you want, the Colombo tactic is often a good way to get it. Once the interview is over, everybody becomes more relaxed. The interviewee's sense that you have some power over him will have disappeared.
Also, you can apply the super Colombo tactic that says that instead of turning around at the door, you wait for a day or two and then just pass by the interviewee's office and tell him that you were just passing by and remembered a question that you forgot to ask. This makes you much less threatening and makes it more likely that you'll get the information that you want. Uh, then the author says, don't leave the interviewee naked. He says that for many people, being interviewed about the problems in their job or business can be unnerving and intimidating. Okay, so you have a professional responsibility to respect the interviewee's anxiety, to allay it, and not to take advantage of it. Respecting his anxiety means not leaving him feeling naked at the end of the interview, as if he's been the subject of a military interrogation. You're looking for two or three things in an interview. Be circumspect about asking questions that, though perfectly appropriate in a business context, may touch on deeply personal matters from the interviewee's perspective. So do not avoid personal questions. It will unnerve the interviewee. Allaying the fears. What does allaying the fears of interviewees mean? It means demonstrating how the process benefits them. That is not just the interviewee, but the whole organization. If you make them realize that their job is going to become more efficient and it would benefit them, it would increase the profitability of their employer, and that also might work to their advantage, then you will allay his fears. Then the interviewee will open up to you more easily. Don't be afraid to offer a quid pro quo. Also, you should resist the temptation or to use the power of the interview as a blunt instrument. Most of the time an interviewee is willing to help. There is no need in the first instance to flash your authority like a police badge. If you run into a real obstruction or hostility, then you may bring in the authority into play, but not until then. Along with power comes the responsibility to use it wisely. Okay, don't you try to overuse your authority, you will scare the interviewee. Then the author moves on to the next topic, that is difficult interviews. He says that conduct enough interviews and you will encounter difficult ones. He says that, of course, once you start interviewing, you will realize that a lot of interviews are very difficult. And why does he say so? He says so from his experience. He gives a great example. You can read it if you want to. But the point that he's trying to make is that if you know that someone is saying something blatantly false, you have to challenge him. You cannot back down. Okay, he says that McKinsey consultants usually have the backing of the top management at the client and can thus stand up to anyone. If you aren't so favored, just remember that if the person you are interviewing is more senior than the person who authorized your project, you will probably have to back down a little when you're challenged. A less hostile but equally difficult situation arises when the interviewee refuses to give you information. Then it's time to pull rank, it's time to show your badge and use your authority. If they still refuse, play hardball. If necessary, call the boss on the phone there and then. Okay, so another difficult type of interview is the passive aggressive interviewee, who the author calls sandbaggers. Sandbaggers will talk all you want, they will just not tell you anything. Okay, so the author says that handling to handle a sandbagger, you have to use an indirect approach. The most useful strategy is in finding someone else in the organization who can tell you what you want to know. If the sandbagger is the only source for the information, then you will have to pull rank and then you may have to ask the boss to have a quiet word with him or her. Okay, then the author says always write a thank you note when you get back to your office after interviewing someone. Take the time to write a thank you letter. It's polite and professional and could pay you back in unexpected ways. It helps build a rapport with the interviewee and you can contact the interviewee anytime in the future. It shows that you value the interviewee's time as much as he does. It's also professional. It puts your company in a favorable light. Also, avoid boilerplate thank you notes. That is, don't just copy paste. uh, okay, you have to make it a bit customized, but that also doesn't mean that you need to write down a gem of immaculately crafted prose. Just make sure it doesn't read like a computer generated form letter. Okay, that's all you have to ensure. And the author reiterates that sometimes a thank you note can yield an unexpected payoff, and he has given an example of that. And he says that sometimes a little politeness can go a long way. So that's it, guys. This is the conclusion of the chapter 8. It was a big chapter, it was an important chapter. I will just go through the important points that the author has covered. Please pardon my handwriting. So, first, the author talks about the interview guide, how it is one of the most important things that you have to do before an interview. Then, he says how you should listen and guide the interview. Then, the author talks about the 7 tips for successful interviews. Then, he says don't leave the interviewee naked, do not intimidate him, they are already scared. Then he says how to handle difficult interviews and has given examples of 2 3 difficult interviews. Then he says that you should always write a thank you note, and then he keeps reiterating the importance of thank you note as it helps establishing good relationships. So I guess that's it, guys. Hope this video added a little bit of value to your day. Please like, share, and subscribe. Rest of the videos will be coming soon. Thank you.